I paid for my daughter's wedding using up all my savings, but my son-in-law used this to humiliate me in front of 300 guests, mocking my sacrifice in his toast. I just smiled, holding back my anger. Suddenly, the groom's uncle almost choked when he heard my name and grabbed the microphone. What he said made my son-in-law cry and turned everything upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept gripping the mug anyway. Blanche stood by my kitchen window, her high-end heels tapping against the faded linoleum as she paced back and forth. Simon lounged in my ancient recliner as if it were his throne, his pricey watch glinting under the lamp with every wave of his hand. "Dad, we have to discuss something crucial." Blanche's tone had that artificial charm she pulled out when she was after something major. Truly major. I placed the mug aside, already steeling myself. "What's bothering you, dear?" Simon sat up straighter, flashing that rehearsed grin of his. "Dad, Hiram, we're relying on $50,000. This is the wedding we've always envisioned." The request struck like a punch. $50,000. My pension check each month hardly stretched to food and bills. I sensed my muscles tightening as I absorbed their demand. "Kids, I don't possess that sum at the moment." Blanche spun on her heel, moisture already welling in her eyes. "Dad, this is my only chance for an ideal wedding. Simon's relatives have influence. Prominent folks will attend. I can't appear budget-conscious. Sweetheart, I get that weddings cost a fortune, but $50,000. Other dads would bend over backward for their girls." Simon's tone grew icy, strategic. "My Uncle Donald often says, a true man steps up for his family's milestones." I saw my daughter's expression fall apart. She dropped into the seat opposite me, those fake tears streaming openly now, the identical tricks she'd honed in her teen years. But now with reinforcement. "Dad, if you truly care about me, you'll make it happen. I've fantasized about this since childhood. Recall how I'd pretend in Mom's vintage wedding gown?" Bringing up my deceased wife nodded something inside me. Sarah would have desired our daughter's joy, yet she'd have spotted this sentimental coercion instantly. "Blanche, you know I'd go to any lengths for you, but I'm surviving on an educator's retirement. I've got around $30,000 tucked away, and that's meant to sustain me." $30,000 is a beginning," Simon cut in, whipping out his phone and swiping the display. "You could borrow the balance. Lenders adore steady retirees." "Simon, I'm 65, incurring debt now. That's what devoted dads do." Blanche's words broke with rehearsed feeling. "Mom would have figured it out. She always championed turning dreams into reality." The space seemed to shrink abruptly, their demands closing in on me from every angle. I gazed at my daughter's tear-marked cheeks, at Simon's anticipating glare, at the pile of overdue invoices on my countertop. I can attempt to sort something." Blanche flung herself across the table, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Oh, Dad, I knew you'd pull through. You're the greatest dad ever." Simon rose, adjusting his blazer. "We'll require verification by next week. The location demands a down payment, and the food service won't reserve our slot without funds." They collected their belongings swiftly, Blanche babbling about blooms and photographers while Simon scrolled through his device. In moments they vanished, leaving behind her fragrance's trace and the burden of their hopes. I remained solitary in my kitchen, eyeing the calculator I'd fished from the cluttered drawer. $30,000 in reserves, $20,000 additional required. The figures smeared as I struggled to grasp what I'd committed to. Beyond, their vehicle's motor receded and the home returned to its usual quiet. I lifted the chilled coffee cup, replaced it, then grabbed the directory to find First National Bank's contact. My fingers trembled. Once they'd departed, the place felt tinier, as if the walls had soaked up their requests and contracted. I laid out my fiscal records on the kitchen surface. Account summaries, retirement papers, the persistent bills that never diminished. The calculator's emerald screen glared at me. 29th and 947.63, that was all of it. I keyed the digits once more, wishing for a shift. None came. Rest evaded me that evening. I nodded off in my recliner, then snapped alert with math swirling in my mind. $20,000 extra at my stage in life. The sleeping quarters seemed vast without Sarah to hash out issues with, so I lingered in the den, viewing ads peddling wonder fixes to folks in my boat. Come dawn, I'd resolved. First National Bank in town appeared unchanged from 3 decades prior, when I'd started my initial account. The stone floors still resounded steps. The metal accents still shone beneath buzzing lights. I held my file of papers and neared the help desk. I must consult someone regarding a personal advance. The youthful lady at the counter grinned formally. Certainly, sir. I'll arrange for you with Mr. Martinez in loans. Carlos Martinez seemed younger than Blanche, with a warm grin and solid grip. His workspace was compact yet tidy. Kin snapshots aligned neatly by his monitor. How may I assist today, Mr. Dunn? I require $20,000 borrowed. The statement emerged firmer than my nerves. It's for my daughter's nuptials. He accessed my records, digits dancing on the keys. You've been a client for ages. Your retirement inflows are reliable. What's the schedule for this funding? As quick as feasible. They want it within days. Carlos bobbed his head, jotting on a notepad. Given your score and track record, we can arrange it. Rate at 7.9%. We might spread repayments over 5 years for ease. 5 years. I'd hit 70 by payoff if I made it. But Blanche's image lingered in my thoughts. Those seemingly genuine tears. What did the installments run? Roughly $405 monthly. Beyond my food allowance, past my energy costs, but feasible if I slashed all else. No eatery meals. No minor indulgences, just essentials till cleared. I'll proceed. The forms consumed an hour. Sheets, signatures, notices on rates and penalties. Carlos guided me through each, likely accustomed to seniors needing more time for money pledges. Funds in your account by Friday a.m., Mr. Dunn. I expressed thanks and headed to my vehicle, sensing both relieved and burdened. Relieved to provide what Blanche sought, burdened for pledging my later years to a single festivity. The route home passed the local college where I'd instructed for 30 years. Pupils dashed over the grounds, packs on backs, futures wide open. I'd been their age, brimming with goals that felt attainable. 3 decades educating, and this is my legacy. A retirement scraping by and a daughter treating me like an ATM. But perhaps that's unjust. Blanche cared for me. I believed that. At times, affection entangled with wants and presumptions. Sarah often claimed I was overly lenient with our girl, always yielding when she pressed. She might have been correct. Friday dawned with an email alert. Transfer complete. $20,000 I fixed on the display briefly, then dialed Blanche. Dad's spot-on timing. I was reviewing floral designs with the coordinator. Honey, could you and Simon visit this afternoon? I've positive updates on the wedding funds. Her squeal of delight almost deafened me. Oh, wow. Yes, 3 p.m. Dad, you're incredible. I disconnected and surveyed my simple den. Soon I'd deliver their fantasy and lock in my monetary destiny. The choice's gravity lodged in my torso like heartburn, but regrets were pointless now. The AM dragged, buzzing with anxiety and prep for the impending. They showed at precisely 3, Blanche nearly hopping as she embraced me at the entrance. Simon trailed, toting a leather binder likely pricier than my pension, so Blanche settled on the sofa's rim, gaze sparkling with eagerness. Don't tease us. I eased into my recliner, bank papers tucked in my lap. I obtained the cash, full $50,000. Simon arched a brow, visibly surprised despite his poise. How'd you pull that off? I cashed out my nest egg and got a loan for the gap. I aimed for nonchalance, like loaning $20,000 at 65 was routine. The funds are ready for your event costs. Blanche hurled herself at me once more, joyful tears replacing prior ploys. Dad, unbelievable that you managed this. It'll be the ultimate wedding. Simon's kin will be amazed. One stipulation. The phrase escaped softer than planned, but they caught it. Simon's look changed, caution entering his gaze. What stipulation? I wish to bring someone vital to me. Someone who belongs there for this occasion. Blanche withdrew from the embrace, bewilderment overtaking her glee. Who? Dad, it's our event. Guest rosters set with the caterer. I know, but this matters deeply. Merely one extra. Simon bent ahead, legal senses alert. Hey, old-timer, you're footing the bill. Fine, but we pick attendees. That's wedding protocol. Kin and dear pals solely. This is kin, sort of. I held my tone even, pulse pounding. Someone in my world longer than you've existed. Blanche rose, striding to the window. Dad, stop being egotistical. This focuses on Simon and me, not your enigma figure. I'm not demanding heaps. Just a single spot at the feast, a place at a funded table. We're thankful for the cash, Simon inserted. But that doesn't grant you authority you lack. Our event, our guidelines. His chill tone smacked like a blow. I sought understanding in my daughter's face, but it had set into known defiance. Dad, adding strangers late is impossible. You grasp seating logistics? Caterer wants headcounts. Site has limits. One won't, it's not the one. Blanche's pitch climbed to adolescent levels. It's you attempting to dictate our big day via funds. That's controlling and self-centered. The hypocrisy after their act days ago struck me. A chill pooled in my gut as they united against me. Simon stood, smoothing his costly jacket. Here's the plan. We'll accept your kind donation and organize the wedding we desire with our selected guests. If that's unacceptable, perhaps skip attending. Simon. Blanche appeared stunned briefly. Then her look melted into pity, worse. Dad? He didn't intend that. But comprehend, it's our moment. We can't let your private motives interfere. I sat in my recliner, peering at these two I'd indebted my tomorrow for, seeing aloof outsiders who deemed my offering their right and my tiny plea excessive. I'm not seeking much, I murmured again. You're seeking what's not yours. Simon snatched his binder and moved to exit. Let's go, Blanche. Appointments await. Blanche paused, glancing between us. For an instant, I hoped she'd side with her dad over her betrothed. Then she grabbed her bag and trailed Simon out. Dad, mull over our words, all right? Don't complicate this. The entrance shut softly, echoing like a locking safe. I lingered in the abrupt hush amid remnants of their claims and the sting of their rejection. $50,000, and I couldn't even add one observer to see its use. The bank sheets littered the ground from the dispute. I stooped to retrieve them, joints groaning. Outside, their auto ignited and departed, hauling my funds and self-respect away. For the first instance post Sarah's passing, solitude hit profoundly. Simon edged nearer, his fancy scent blending with my den's musty atmosphere. You believe your cash grants sway over our milestone. I stayed put, clutching the recliner's arms. I'm not after sway, just one meaningful individual. Meaningful to you? Blanche's words oozed disbelief. What of what's meaningful to us? To our tomorrow? Your tomorrow I'm bankrolling? The retort escaped unchecked. Simon's gaze sharpened, and I noted my daughter's cheeks redden with fury. Bankrolling? She chuckled, void of mirth. Dad, you're not bankrolling. You're offering a present to your girl on her life's peak day. That's paternal duty. Precisely. Simon folded his arms, band gleaming in the light. This ain't commerce, elder. This is kin. Kin? The term bit harder than anticipated. I scanned my humble den, the furniture Sarah and I acquired decades back. The snapshots where Blanche beamed at me with real affection. The table marked by family evenings. If this is kin, I uttered softly, then why bar my important invite? Blanche flung her arms, pacing to the pane anew. Because it's not your show. Don't you get it? This is Simon and my occasion. Our circle, our picks, our festivity financed by my offering. Offering? Simon's bark was rough. You mean duty or honor to join your daughter's bliss. A chill lodged in my core. These weren't thankful offspring's phrases for a lavish present. These were presumptuous outsiders' edicts, seeing my input as owed. I emptied my reserves, I stated, tone firmer than my insides. I secured a loan spanning years to settle. All for your flawless event. One guest feels fair. Blanche whirled, tears anew. Now you're shaming us, souring our acceptance of your present. Present? The term sharpened unintentionally. Blanche, this isn't a present. This is me hawking my later days so you can dazzle strangers unaware of me. Simon shifted to Blanche's flank, arm encircling her waist defensively. Hear me, Dad Hiram. We value your input, but value doesn't equal yielding our say. We set the roster. We set the vibe. We set the event style. And if that's intolerable, they shared a swift, scheming glance. When Simon faced me, his visage had stiffened to unfamiliar steel. Then perhaps disengage entirely. The quiet widened like an abyss. I fixed on my daughter, awaiting her to counter her partner, to back her dad, to recall 32 years of devotion and giving. She nodded instead. Dad, if you can't rejoice without dominating, maybe Simon's spot on. Maybe withdraw. Withdraw from my child's nuptials. From the party I'm sponsoring with scarce funds. I rose gradually, joints complaining. I understand. Simon seized his binder, motions jagged with annoyance. Fine. Glad we're aligned. Blanche lingered at the exit, glancing back with possible remorse. Dad, you can still attend. Just keep it off you. Keep it off me? The guy shelling $50,000 shouldn't center himself. They exited wordlessly, door clicking shut in a way that rang conclusive. I stood amid the den's quiet and their disdain's residue. The bank papers strewn from our clash, I knelt to gather, perusing the agreed terms. $405 monthly for 60 terms, $20,000 plus accruals, repaid by a septuagenarian on fixed means. Also, my daughter could urge my retreat from her world. For the initial time since Sarah's burial, abandonment struck deep. The ensuing weeks smeared like diluted paints in a downpour. April brought its typical vow of fresh starts, but in our family ties something had decayed irreparably. My phone buzzed less often. When Blanche rang, it concerned practicalities: caterer down payments, site verifications, supplier settlements, never opinions, never tastes, always cash. Dad, florist needs deposit by Thursday. Her delivery held a professional clip of dealings. $2,000 covers our picked setups. I skipped querying the setups. Post the clash at Petals and Stems, where my modest centerpiece idea drew clear discomfort, I'd learned silence. Your choices work, I'd remarked then, hearing the florist cite figures dwarfing my retirement. Blanche had swapped a glance with Simon, that typical role for clueless folks. Dad, your style just differs from our vision. Differs. The term trailed me through later vendor sessions where questions went to the pair as I sat, checkbook ready, a silent financial resource in an expensive suit I'd bought for the occasion. The caterer's office smelled of garlic and fresh herbs, but the aroma couldn't mask the bitter taste of being ignored. Simon spread menu options across the conference table, while Blanche pointed to selections that cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a week. We don't want to look cheap in front of our friends, she explained to the caterer, as if I weren't sitting 3 FT away. Quiddy is more important than budget. Easy to say when someone else's budget was footing the bill. By mid-April, the exclusions had become systematic. Wedding planning meetings happened without me. My input replaced by cheerful summaries delivered over hurried phone calls. Everything's going perfectly, Dad. The venue coordinator loves our vision never ours, always theirs. I'd driven to the Oakwood Manor alone one afternoon, curious to see where my $50,000 would be spent. The ballroom was elegant. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, beautiful and expensive, exactly what they'd wanted. The event coordinator, a polished woman named Michelle, showed me around with professional courtesy. Your daughter and her fiancé have excellent taste. This will be one of our most elegant celebrations this season. I nodded, imagining Blanche in her wedding dress, Simon in his tuxedo, surrounded by 300 guests who would never know the sacrifice behind their perfect day. Are you excited about the wedding? Michelle asked as we finished the tour. Excited wasn't the word I'd use. Resigned, maybe melancholy, certainly. It'll be beautiful, I said instead. The music selection meeting was my final attempt at participation. I'd arrived at the DJ studio with a few suggestions, songs Sarah and I had danced to classics that held meaning for our family. Simon listened to my first suggestion for exactly 30 seconds before cutting it off. This is our generation's music, not yours. We want something that reflects who we are. Who they were apparently had nothing to do with where they'd come from. Late April brought the final insult disguised as consideration. Blanche called on a Tuesday evening, her voice artificially bright. Dad, we've decided to handle the remaining details ourselves. You've done so much already and we don't want to stress you with all the little decisions. The little decisions? Like whether her father would have any voice in the wedding he was funding. We'll handle everything from here, she continued. You just worry about showing up and enjoying the celebration. Showing up like a guest at someone else's party, which I was beginning to realize was exactly what I'd become. May arrived with a formal invitation in my mailbox addressed to Mr. Hiram Dunn in elegant calligraphy. No father of the bride, no special recognition, just another name on a list of 300 people invited to witness what my sacrifice had created. The invitation sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Beautiful cardstock, expensive printing, perfect grammar, requesting my presence at their celebration. My presence, not my blessing, not my joy, just my attendance at an event where I'd be as invisible as I'd become in the planning process. I RSVP'd with a single word, attending. The morning of May 10th arrived with perfect weather. Cloudless sky, gentle breeze, temperatures in the mid-70s. The kind of day Sarah would have called heaven-sent for a wedding. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences and Blanche's college graduation. The mirror reflected a man who looked older than his 65 years, weathered by months of rejection and financial stress. St. Matthew's Church sat on the corner of 5th and Main, its Gothic spires reaching toward that perfect sky. Cars already filled the parking lot when I arrived at 1:30, 30 minutes before the ceremony. I recognized none of them. Expensive vehicles that matched their owner's elevated social status. Inside the church blazed with flowers. White roses and leaves covered every surface, their fragrance mixing with the scent of polished wood and burning candles. My $2,500 for florals had bought something truly spectacular. "You can sit anywhere you like," an usher told me, his arm gesturing vaguely toward the pews. I'd expected to be seated in the front row, the traditional place for the father of the bride. Instead, I found myself directed toward the back, behind clusters of guests who whispered excitedly about the upcoming ceremony. The front rows filled with people I didn't recognize. Simon's colleagues, Blanche's co-workers, friends from their shared social circle. The second row held what appeared to be extended family from Simon's side, including a distinguished older man who commanded attention and deference from those around him. Donald Reed, I realized, Simon's uncle, the successful restaurateur, who built a small empire of upscale establishments, the man whose approval seemed to matter more than mine. Organ music swelled through the sanctuary as the processional began. Simon took his position at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, flanked by groomsmen who looked like they'd stepped from a magazine spread. Blanche appeared at the church's entrance, and even through my hurt, I had to admit she looked radiant. Her dress flowed like water, the beadwork catching light from the stained glass windows. This was my little girl grown into a beautiful woman about to start her new life. She walked alone down the aisle, her bouquet of white roses steady in her hands. No father to escort her, no recognition of the man who'd raised her, loved her, sacrificed for this moment. I'd imagined walking her down that aisle 1,000 times over the years. In those dreams, she'd held my arm tightly, tears of happiness in her eyes, whispering how much she loved me as we approached the altar together. Instead, she passed my pew without acknowledgement, her focus entirely on Simon waiting at the altar. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about honoring parents and building new families. Blanche and Simone exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising devotion and partnership in voices that carried to every corner of the sanctuary. "I promise to honor the family that shaped you," Simon said, his voice clear and confident, "and to build a new family that reflects our love. Honor the family that shaped her." The words echoed through the church, while the man who'd actually shaped her sat invisible in the back row. Rings were exchanged, traditional words spoken, and finally the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Simon kissed Blanche as applause filled the sanctuary, camera flashes capturing their joy for posterity. Through it all, I sat silent, witness to the celebration my sacrifice had funded, surrounded by strangers who would never know the price of their beautiful afternoon. As the recessional began and the wedding party filed past, I caught Blanche's eye for just a moment. She smiled, bright, genuine, happy, but it wasn't meant for me. It was the radiant smile of a bride on her perfect day, shared with everyone and no one in particular. The guests began filing out, chattering about how lovely everything had been, how perfect the couple looked, how elegant the ceremony was. "Beautiful wedding," someone behind me said. They spared no expense. No expense indeed. I joined the crowd moving toward the church doors where Blanche and Simon stood receiving congratulations. I could have joined the line, waited my turn to hug the bride and shake the groom's hand, could have added my voice to the chorus of well-wishers praising their perfect day. Instead, I slipped out a side door and walked to my car, following the stream of traffic toward Oakwood Manor, where the reception would unfold. 300 guests celebrating love and new beginnings with premium food, top-shelf liquor, and live music, all of it paid for by a man who'd become a stranger at his own daughter's wedding. The drive to Oakwood Manor took 15 minutes but felt like hours. I followed the procession of luxury cars through Columbus's historic district. My modest sedan lost among BMWs and Mercedes that belonged to people who'd never mortgaged their future for someone else's happiness. Oakwood Manor rose before us like something from a magazine spread. Limestone columns, manicured gardens, and crystal chandeliers visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Every detail screamed expense, and every expense had my signature on it. Guests streamed through the grand entrance, their laughter echoing off marble floors as they moved toward the ballroom where cocktails awaited. I entered alone, watching clusters of friends and family gravitating naturally toward Blanche and Simon, who held court near the bar like royalty receiving subjects. "Hiram." Simon's voice carried across the room, artificially warm. "Come meet some of our friends." I approached the group reluctantly, recognizing the trap in his tone. Simon had his arm around Blanche's waist, both of them radiant in their wedding finery, surrounded by young professionals who looked like they'd stepped from a corporate recruitment brochure. Everyone, this is my father-in-law. Simon's smile was too bright, too practiced. A real hero, he took out a loan for our happiness. The group turned toward me with polite interest, their champagne glasses catching the chandelier light. A woman in a designer dress smiled warmly. Really, that's so generous. Yes, Simon continued, his voice carrying that edge I'd learned to recognize. He's really committed to making our dreams come true. Aren't you, Hiram? The expectant faces around us waited for my response. I could feel the weight of their attention, the social pressure to play along with Simon's performance. I just want my daughter to be happy, I said quietly. Happy? Simon laughed, raising his glass. An expensive taste apparently, but that's what credit is for, right? More laughter rippled through the group. Not malicious exactly, but each chuckle felt like a small blade. These people didn't understand the cruelty disguised as humor, the months of systematic humiliation that had led to this moment. Simon, Blanche murmured, but she didn't correct him. What? I'm celebrating your father's generosity. He turned back to the group, his audience captivated. Did you know he had to liquidate his entire savings for tonight? Talk about commitment. A man in an expensive suit whistled appreciatively. Wow, that's serious dedication. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Around us, the reception continued. Servers passing hors d'oeuvres that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Musicians tuning instruments for entertainment I'd never requested. Flowers arranged in designs I'd never approved. Of course, Simon continued, emboldened by his audience's attention. He tried to set conditions at first, wanted to control our guest list just because he was paying. Really? The woman seemed genuinely surprised. What kind of conditions? Simon's eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. Oh, he had some mystery person he wanted to invite. Someone important to him, as if our wedding was about anyone except Blanche and me. The group murmured understanding, nodding along with Simon's version of events. They saw a reasonable groom protecting his wedding from an interfering father-in-law, not a son-in-law humiliating the man who'd sacrificed everything for their celebration. Well, said the man in the expensive suit, it sounds like you handled it perfectly. The wedding should be about the couple. Exactly, Simon beamed, draining his champagne. Though I have to admit, having someone else foot the bill does make everything easier. More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as appreciation. I stood there, smile frozen on my face, enduring each comment like physical blows while trying to maintain whatever dignity I had left. Through the crowd, I spotted staff preparing for dinner service, arranging place cards at tables decorated with centerpieces that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Everything beautiful, everything perfect, everything paid for with borrowed money I'd be repaying until I was 70 years old. Speaking of which, Simon said, checking his watch, my Uncle Donald should be arriving soon. Wait until you meet him. Now there's a man who no-show to celebrate family properly. His uncle, the mysterious Donald Reed, I'd heard referenced but never met. Simon's voice carried genuine warmth when he mentioned the man, a respect he'd never shown me despite everything I'd done. He raised me after my parents died, Simon explained to the group. Built a restaurant empire from nothing. Real success story. Success story, unlike their tired teachers standing before them. Apparently, the group began dispersing as dinner preparations intensified. But Simon's words lingered in the air like smoke. I watched him move through the crowd, confident and cruel, anticipating his uncle's arrival, while dismissing the man who'd made his perfect evening possible. Around me, 300 guests enjoyed cocktails and conversation, preparing for an elegant dinner and evening of celebration. None of them knew the true cost of their champagne and caviar, but perhaps that was about to change. 2 hours into the reception, the atmosphere had settled into elegant sophistication. Guests moved between cocktails and conversation, their voices creating a pleasant buzz beneath the classical music I'd paid for but never chosen. Simon checked his watch repeatedly, his excitement building towards something I didn't yet understand. He should be here any minute, he told Blanche, straightening his bow tie for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She squeezed his arm reassuringly. Uncle Don will love everything. How could he not? I stood near the edge of the ballroom, nursing a whiskey I couldn't really afford and watching the social dynamics I'd funded but wasn't part of. The irony wasn't lost on me, invisible at my own expense. Then the room's energy shifted. A distinguished man appeared in the doorway and conversations paused as heads turned toward him. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Silver hair, perfectly styled expensive suit that fit like it was made for him. eyes that seemed to catalog everything with sharp intelligence. Donald Reed had arrived. Simon practically vibrated with excitement, abandoning our conversation mid-sentence to hurry toward his uncle. I watched their union, warm embraces, genuine affection, the kind of familial bond I'd once shared with Blanche before money and manipulation poisoned it. "Everyone," Simon's voice carried across the ballroom, "I want you to meet my uncle Donald, the man who made me who I am." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by celebrity magnetism. Donald accepted the attention graciously, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the ease of someone comfortable in social situations. "Simon, you've outdone yourself," Donald said, surveying the ballroom with appreciation. "This is magnificent." His voice carried authority earned through decades of business success. I found myself studying him from across the room, trying to understand what made this man so important to my son-in-law. "Uncle Don, you're going to love meeting everyone," Simon beamed. "This is our dream wedding." "Dreams have a way of coming true when you work hard enough for them," Donald replied, though his eyes continued scanning the room with businessman's attention to detail. A woman near me whispered to her companion, "That's Donald Reed. He owns 5 restaurants in the city. Worth millions, worth millions." No wonder Simon showed him the respect he'd never offered me. The crowd naturally organized itself around Donald, guests eager to introduce themselves to someone of his stature. He handled each interaction with practiced charm, asking thoughtful questions and remembering names with impressive facility. "Mr. Reed," gushed a young woman, "we've heard so much about you. What an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Donald replied smoothly. "Any friend of Simon and Blanche is family to me." Family. The word carried weight when he said it. Genuine meaning behind the social pleasantry. I watched him interact with my daughter, polite, respectful, treating her with the dignity I'd once expected from her husband. Simon hovered nearby, basking in reflected glory. His uncle's presence transformed him from smug groom-tuger nephew, desperate to prove himself worthy of such an impressive relative. "Uncle Don," Simon said, guiding him toward the center of the room. "Let me tell you about some of the people here tonight. You'll appreciate this." I found myself moving closer, drawn despite myself, to observe this family dynamic that clearly meant everything to Simon. Whatever Donald Reed represented to my son-in-law was powerful enough to make him seek approval he'd never needed from me. Donald's eyes swept across their reception, taking in details with businessman's precision. The expensive floral arrangements, the premium bar service, the elegant table settings, everything my credit cards had made possible. "This must have cost a fortune," he observed quietly to Simon. "Every penny worth it," Simon replied. "When you love someone, you spare no expense." "No expense?" As if he'd paid for any of it himself. I watched this interaction from my peripheral position, noting how Simon's entire demeanor changed in his uncle's presence. Gone was the casual cruelty he'd shown me, replaced by almost childlike eagerness for approval. "You've built something beautiful here," Donald continued, his hand on Simon's shoulder. "Your parents would be proud." The mention of Simon's deceased parents brought visible emotion to my son-in-law's face. Whatever tragedy had brought these two together clearly created bonds deeper than I'd realized. As the dinner hour approached, guests began moving toward their assigned tables. I found my place card at a table near the back, close enough to observe, far enough away to be forgotten. The seating arrangement told its own story about my position in this family hierarchy. Donald naturally sat at the head table with the bride and groom, holding court among the most important guests. From my distant table, I could see Simon's animated conversation, his gestures becoming more expansive as he told stories I couldn't hear, but could imagine. The man who'd raised him commanded respect and attention Simon had never shown me. Whatever happened next would flow from that fundamental difference in how we were valued, and something told me the evening was about to become much more interesting. An hour after Donald's arrival, Simon had transformed into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the calculated coldness he'd shown me for months, replaced by animated energy, as he basked in his uncle's approval. The combination proved dangerous for everyone involved. "Uncle Don," Simon said loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "You know what's funny about tonight?" Donald was cutting into his filet mignon, the most expensive option on the menu. I'd approved sight unseen. "What's that?" "My father-in-law thinks he can set conditions just because he's footing the bill." Several guests at nearby tables turned toward the conversation, drawn by Simon's theatrical tone. I felt my stomach clench as I recognized the familiar setup for another round of public humiliation. Donald paused mid-chew. Conditions. Oh yes. Simon's voice carried across the ballroom with disturbing enthusiasm. Poor Hiram over there. He gestured toward my distant table. Wanted to control our guest list. Can you imagine? I gripped my whiskey glass tighter, watching Donald's expression shift to mild interest. He followed Simon's gesture, his eyes finding me for the first time that evening. He actually had the nerve to demand we invite some mystery person. Simon continued warming to his theme. Someone important to him. As if our wedding was about anyone except Blanche and me. Laughter rippled from the surrounding tables. Guests who'd been enjoying their expensive dinners now had entertainment to go with their meals, courtesy of my humiliation. That does seem inappropriate, someone commented from a neighboring table. Right, Simon beamed at the validation. I told him this is our day, our celebration, our choices. Just because you're paying doesn't mean you get top-lay puppet master. More laughter, more casual cruelty disguised as reasonable boundary setting. I sat frozen in my chair watching my son-in-law perform for his beloved uncle, using my pain as material. Donald's expression had grown thoughtful. His businessman's instincts apparently picking up on something in the dynamic, and he accepted that eventually. Simon's confidence was building with each laugh, each nod of approval from his audience, though I have to admit it took some convincing. Poor man had to take out a loan for all this luxury you see around us. He swept his arm dramatically, encompassing the ballroom's elegance, the crystal, the flowers, the 5-course meal being served by professional waitstaff, alone. Donald's voice carried a note I couldn't identify. Oh yes, Hiram Dunn had to liquidate his entire savings and borrow $20,000 just to afford his daughter's happiness. Simon's voice rang with cruel amusement. Talk about financial commitment. The name hit the air like a physical force. I watched Donald's face change. Subtle but unmistakable shift from mild interest to sharp attention. His fork remained suspended halfway to his mouth as he processed what he'd just heard. What did you say his name was? Donald's voice had gone quiet, controlled. Simon, oblivious to the change in his uncle's demeanor, continued his performance. Hiram Dunn, sweet old guy really. Just completely out of his depth with modern wedding expenses. Had to explain to him several times that this isn't the 1980s. Quality celebrations require serious investment. The laughter around us began to feel forced, uncomfortable. Some guests were starting to recognize the cruelty in Simon's words, the inappropriateness of mocking someone who'd sacrificed so much. But Simon, intoxicated by what he interpreted as his uncle's attention, pressed on. The best part is he still thinks he should have a say in how we spend his money. Had to set him straight about who makes the decisions in this family. Donald had gone completely still. His eyes remained fixed on Simon, but something behind them had changed fundamentally. The warmth, the pride, the familial affection, all of it transforming into something much colder. Hiram Dunn, Donald repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right. Simon raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. Here's to fathers-in-law who know their place, writing checks and staying quiet. The surrounding tables erupted in uncomfortable laughter, but I noticed several guests exchanging glances, their discomfort becoming visible. Even Blanche looked uncertain, perhaps sensing that Simon had crossed a line she hadn't quite identified. Donald sat down his fork with deliberate precision. His eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment time seemed suspended. Recognition flickered in his expression, not just of my name, but of something deeper, more significant. Something that was about to change everything. As the evening settled into the reception's final phase, servers cleared dessert plates while guests lingered over coffee and after-tea drinks. The master of ceremonies tapped his champagne glass, calling for attention across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now hear from the groom. Simon practically bounced to his feet, his face flushed with wine and the intoxication of his uncle's presence. Hemoved toward the microphone with the confidence of a man who believed he commanded the room, unaware that his next words would destroy everything he thought he understood about himself. Thank you, everyone. His voice boomed through the sound system. What an incredible evening we've shared together. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I sat at my distant table bracing myself for whatever fresh humiliation he had planned. Donald remained at the head table, his champagne glass untouched, his eyes fixed on his nephew with an expression I couldn't quite read. I want to thank everyone who made this magical day possible, Simon continued. his voice carrying that familiar edge of performance. My beautiful bride, our wonderful friends, and especially he paused dramatically, surveying the room like a comedian, timing his punchline, especially my father-in-law, who showed such dedication to our happiness. A few guests chuckled uncertainly. Simon's smile widened, encouraged by the response. Seriously, folks, let me tell you about commitment. His voice grew stronger, more theatrical. How many fathers would liquidate their entire life savings for their daughter's wedding? More laughter, though I noticed several guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. But that's not all. Simon raised his champagne glass higher. When that wasn't enough, this dedicated man took out a personal loan at 65 years old. The laughter was becoming forced now, guests beginning to recognize the cruelty beneath the supposed gratitude. Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise our glasses to Hiram Dunn, the man who mortgaged his golden years for our golden day. I felt the familiar burn of public humiliation, but something had changed in me during these months of systematic degradation. The shame felt distant now, replaced by a cold clarity about who Simon really was. And the best part, Simon continued, his voice rising with cruel enthusiasm, is how generous he was about our little disagreements. He wanted to control our guest list. Can you believe it? As if paying for something gives you a say in how it's used. The ballroom had grown quieter. Even those who'd laughed earlier seemed uncomfortable with this level of public mockery. But don't worry about old Hiram. Simon's voice carried across the silent room. After tonight, Blanche and I promise we'll never have to live so modestly as he does. We'll make sure his sacrifice really pays off for us. That's when it happened. Donald Reed, who'd been sitting motionless through Simon's performance, suddenly lurched forward. His champagne glass hit the table with a sharp crack, the contents spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Stop. The word exploded from him with such force that Simon actually staggered backward. Give me that microphone. The ballroom fell into complete silence. 300 guests turned to stare at the distinguished businessman who just interrupted the groom's toast with shocking intensity. Simon stood frozen at the microphone, confusion replacing his cruel confidence. Uncle Don, what's the microphone? Simon. Donald's voice carried absolute authority. Now Simon's hand trembled as he extended the microphone toward his uncle. The confidence that had carried him through months of tormenting me evaporated in the face of Donald's obvious fury. Donald rose from his chair with deliberate precision, his movements commanding the attention of every person in the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of moral authority that comes from a lifetime of earned respect. There's something you all need to know. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Waitstaff stopped clearing tables. Guests held their breath. Even the musicians had gone quiet, sensing that something profound was about to unfold. Donald's eyes found mine across the crowded room, and for the first time all evening I saw something that looked like recognition, something that looked like respect, something that was about to change everything. Donald held the microphone with steady hands, but I could see the emotion barely contained beneath his composed exterior. The ballroom remained frozen in anticipation. 300 guests sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. 32 years ago, Donald began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. There was a terrible house here on Maple Street in this very city. A few older guests nodded, remembering. I felt my stomach clench as memories I'd tried to forget came flooding back. The smell of smoke, the sound of sirens, a child's terrified crying. A young father and mother died in that blaze. Donald continued, his eyes never leaving Simon's face. They left behind a 2-year-old son trapped on the second floor while flames consumed the staircase below. Simon's face had gone pale. Blanche reached for his hand, but he seemed frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. Neighbors stood watching helplessly as the house burned, knowing a child was inside but unable to reach him. Donald's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But one man, a complete stranger, heard that little boy's cries and didn't hesitate. My hands were shaking now. I could see that burning house as clearly as if it were yesterday. The orange flames licking at broken windows. The desperate sound of a child's voice calling for help that wasn't coming fast enough. This stranger ran into that burning building without thinking about his own safety. He fought through smoke and flames, found the terrified child and carried him to safety just minutes before the roof collapsed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to look at me, beginning to understand where this story was heading. That stranger suffered severe burns on his hands and arms. Donald continued, his voice thick with emotion. He spent 3 days in the hospital. When he was discharged, he asked only that the child be placed with family who would love him. Simon was staring at his uncle now, recognition dawning in his eyes like a terrible sunrise. That 2-year-old boy grew up to become a successful man, surrounded by people who cared about him, never knowing the name of the hero who saved his life. Donald's voice broke slightly. That child was you, Simon. The words hit the ballroom like a physical force. Gasps echoed from multiple tables. Simon's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. And that hero, Donald said, his eyes finding mine again across the room. The man who ran into a burning building to save a stranger's child, who asked for nothing in return, who spent 32 years never mentioning his courage, is Hiram Doan. The silence that followed was deafening. Simon stood frozen at his table, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. Blanche had covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I sat in my chair, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes, remembering that night when I'd simply done what anyone would do, what I'd hoped someone would do if my own child were in danger. I had no idea, I said quietly, but the microphone picked up my words. I never knew that little boy was you, Simon. Simon's legs gave out. I collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with what I realized were sobs. 32 years, Donald continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of moral judgment. 32 years this man has carried the scars of saving your life. And tonight I've watched you mock him, humiliate him, treat him like a burden. The very man who gave you every breath you've taken since you were 2 years old. The crowd had begun to stir, whispers growing louder as the full implications sank in. The expensive reception funded by a hero's sacrifice, the cruel jokes aimed at the man who'd risked everything for a stranger's child. Every dollar this man spent on your wedding, Donald said, his voice rising. Every sacrifice he made, every humiliation he endured, he did it for the same reason he ran into that burning building 32 years ago, because that's who he is. A man who puts others before himself even when they don't deserve it. Simon looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears, his eyes finding mine across the ballroom. In that moment, I saw not the cruel man who tormented me for months, but the frightened child I'd carried from that burning house so long ago. And despite everything he'd put me through, my heart broke for him. Simon rose from his chair on unsteady legs, his face transformed by the weight of recognition. The cruel confidence that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by something raw and broken and real. He walked toward me slowly, each step carrying the burden of months of cruelty. He was finally beginning to understand. The 300 guests watched in absolute silence as he approached my table. Hiram, his voice cracked as he spoke my name. Please, please forgive me. I stood to meet him. This man I'd saved as a child and who tormented me as an adult. Seeing now how the scared little boy still lived somewhere inside the successful businessman. You didn't know, son, I said quietly. None of us knew the connection, but I should have known better anyway. Simon's words came in a rush, tears streaming down his face. You gave me everything, the money, your savings, your dignity, and I threw it back in your face. I treated you like you were nothing when he was everything. Donald's voice carried from the microphone. The reason you're alive to stand here tonight. Simon dropped to his knees in front of me, this proud man humbling himself before the entire gathering. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to take back the things I said, the way I treated you. I reached down and helped him to his feet, feeling the eyes of everyone in the ballroom watching this moment of grace and redemption. You stand up, I said simply. You be better than you were. That's how you make it right. Simon nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve, then turned to face the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of the arrogance that had characterized his earlier toast. I need that microphone back, he said to his uncle. Donald handed it over without a word, pride and pain mixing in his expression as he watched his nephew begin the long journey toward becoming the man he'd hoped to raise. Simon took the microphone with shaking hands. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice was rough with emotion. Everything I said earlier tonight was wrong, worse than wrong. It was cruel and ungrateful and completely backwards. He turned to look at me, his eyes still bright with tears. This man, Hiram Dunn, is not just the father of my beautiful wife. He's not just the generous soul who funded this incredible celebration you see around you. Simon's voice grew stronger as he spoke, finding his footing in this new reality. He's the reason I'm standing here tonight at all. 32 years ago, when I was just a baby, he risked his life to save mine. He ran into a burning building and pulled me to safety. carrying burns and scars he bears to this day. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Several guests had begun to applaud, but Simon held up his hand. And how did I repay this heroism? By spending months treating him like he was beneath me, by mocking his sacrifice, by humiliating him publicly, by making him feel small and unwanted at his own daughter's wedding. His voice broke again, but it pressed on. The man who saved my life had to take out a loan to pay for my dream wedding. And I thanked him by treating him like a joke. Simon turned toward me again, his voice carrying across the ballroom with new strength. But that ends tonight, right here, right now. He raised his champagne glass, which someone had quietly refilled during the revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, raise your glasses. Not to me, not to my new wife, not to our happiness. 300 guests lifted their glasses as one, the crystal catching the chandelier light stars. Raise your glasses to Hiram Dunn. Simon's voice rang with genuine emotion. The man who gave me life, not once but twice. Once when he pulled me from that burning house, and again tonight when he showed me what true grace looks like, by forgiving someone who didn't deserve it. To Hiram. The cry rose from every corner of the ballroom. Thunderous applause following as 300 guests rose to their feet in recognition of heroism that had taken 3 decades to be properly acknowledged. I stood there overwhelmed by the sudden reversal, surrounded by the same people who'd watched my humiliation now celebrating my vindication. But the real gift wasn't their applause. It was seeing my daughter's face shining with new understanding and pride in her father. Blanche made her way through the crowd to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so proud of you. I love you." As I held my daughter close, surrounded by the celebration my sacrifice had created, but finally invited to truly enjoy, I realized that sometimes the longest roads lead to the most meaningful destinations. The last toast of the evening belonged to truth, justice, and the quiet power of doing what's right, even when no one is watching, even when it costs everything, even when it takes 32 years to be recognized. But it's always worth the wait. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.